Who's watching the Grey Cup tomorrow? Is this a big deal?
No, it's kind of a conflict. We have 5 o'clock worship service.
And that's a conflict?
Well, the game's at 4.
And the conflict is? Okay. Have the days when people have Grey Cup parties passed, or do people still do
I
that?
think the partiers.
Not when
Do that?
Saskatchewan's in the Grey Cup.
Hey, well, I hope Saskatchewan wins. I hope Saskatchewan wins. I mean, anyway, yeah.
Saskatchewan isn't playing, we replayed the 18th with the 89.
Oh, and what happened in '89?
Well, they won
Oh,
over the touchdown.
81, you remember?
89.
Oh,
so this is a replay.
Hopefully not score.
I
Keep losing the bet.
I know a Lutheran pastor from BC, who is going to be at the game. And the story goes that when she was dating, not as a teenager, but a little later, and planning on getting married, one of the conditions of the marriage was that she was always going to go to the Grey Cup game, no matter where it was. And this had to be understood as part of the marriage thing. So apparently there are some passions here around this. Okay, I want to talk to you very briefly, and then we're going to come back to the 5-step about how change takes place. And let me walk into this with some simple illustrations. For example, in Luke 10 it talks about the harvest being plentiful. When I was a whole lot younger, I went to my first small town parish, in which a lot of the folk in that church were farmers. And what you have to understand is that I had grown up in the inner city in Liverpool, and then lived in Toronto, and then moved to Los Angeles, and studied in Los Angeles, and then moved to Chicago. And so for me, to see green grass for more than 2 hours created agoraphobia. But I was always keen to learn. And this one late summer, early spring, one of my friends, Gord, who owned kind of a, don't laugh, 100-acre hobby farm, was going to hay. And so I said, hey, let me help you hay. And thinking, no big deal, this isn't hard. And so we went out after church in the morning and started haying. Well, I didn't have a clue. I mean, literally. He said, get behind this machine, and as this is going to get thrown out, and when this bale gets thrown out, here's what you do. You get all these instructions, and of course, I'm a bright guy, I got lots of degrees, I figured these things out fast, all made sense, and of course, when you get behind the machine, and this stuff starts spitting out, guess what? You have no idea what's going on, and you get frustrated, and you do it all wrong, and God had to stop the tractor and come back and say, Al, okay, are you ready? I said, what? He said, number 1, here's the first thing that you do. Number 2, and he gave me some simple steps to follow. When I got those steps inside my thick skull, the country boy, the city boy, I could actually do something that I'd never done before. Or, poking fun at me a bit more, in high school, I worked with the Board of Education to sort of earn the money, well, actually it was in university, it doesn't matter, to sort of pay for my university. And so, one summer I worked as a janitor in one of the schools. Now, there are certain things that you learn, and here's the first thing that you learn. You have all summer to clean this school. so don't get too excited or energetic. And I said, well, what does that mean? And the guy who was the head janitor said, here's what you do. You take one of the classrooms closest to the entranceway, and you pile it up with all the furniture that you can find. And then, as fast and as efficiently as you can, you clean all the other rooms in the school. And then you spend the rest of the summer sitting down reading books and having a good time. And watching out the window for anybody to come up so that you all get up and go work in that room that's piled up. So that's when I learned how to, what's called, beat the system. But then there was this other piece. It was called buffing the gym and buffing the terrazzo floors of the corridors. And I don't, some of you may know this, they have these machines that spin, right? And you hold the machines, and when you hold the machines, you can you put abrasives underneath them, or you put polishes underneath them. Remember? Does this make sense to people? Okay. So, I did not understand why, when I looked at the janitor doing that, I said, let me do that, that looks easy. And why he sat down with a coffee with some friends before I got up to do it with a big, broad smile on his face. And I walked up to that sucker, because I'd watched and I was smart, and I took a hold of it, and I pulled the trigger, and I went, you ever done that before? And after about 10 frustrating minutes, he gets up, and he says, okay, Al, first. And he starts to give me some steps. So you see, here's what we've learned, and it's, when I say it, it's obvious. Change is about learning new habits and new practices. And as Fiona's pointed out, you don't learn those by reading a book or just watching somebody. You learn them by trying. And the way you try is you get given some simple steps to walk through. So what we've done out of that learning is create a 5-step process. There's nothing magical about that. It's just recognizing that's just how all of us learn when you begin to think about it. Now, what happens is that when you learn those steps, they cease to be steps. So when God was haying, he didn't think about what he was doing. When that janitor was cleaning floors with that infernal machine, he wasn't thinking about what he was doing, because it got in, new practices had got inside of him, and they were the way he worked. So what we want to do is invite you into some steps that invite you to learn some new practices. So that's the first thing that we've learned about change. Second thing we've learned about change is where you begin. And what Fiona's described to you, what we talked about, is we begin where we are, not where we want people to be. I, as a pastor, made all the classic mistakes, which means that I would stand up and I would preach these amazing sermons. Well, people always told me that they were wonderful. That painted a picture of what God wanted to do in the world and how we could join God in the world. And I thought I was doing an amazing thing, telling people where we needed to go, right? And when they didn't follow, under my breath, I told them where they ought to go. But that was a different piece. But I had this conviction that if I just painted the big picture, people could automatically get there. But what I learned is that that's not how we work when it comes to change. Change is about needing to see and take steps and to begin in the ordinary. And in fact, I learned as a parish pastor that the more big pictures you create for people, the more overwhelmed they feel. and the more discouraged they feel. And that the way in which change takes place is by engaging in simple experiments that begin where people are and isn't telling them where they should be. So, my favorite illustration of this is my granddaughter. I never tire of telling people I have 5 grandchildren, which is not enough, but my kids have made other decisions, and 4 are boys and 1 is a girl. So, my favorite is well, it's not my favorite, but my granddaughter is very special. And Maddie is 6. And it'll happen again when I get home now. She always got bruises on her body, all the time. And the bruises is not because she's fragile or got some disease. It's because she never stops experimenting. So she loves gymnastics. And what she used to do was she'd watch young women on these, this bar that you walk on and do all this amazing stuff that I wouldn't even dream about. So obviously she doesn't have one of those bars. So she'd get up on the back of the Chesterfield. And she'd say, "Look, Granddad, see what I can do." And I don't laugh, she'd try to tiptoe across the top of the Chesterfield, and then in the tiptoeing do a pirouette, which always meant that she landed on the ground. And she'd land on the ground so many times in so many different places with bruises that now it's literally quite normal for her to say, "Oh, it's okay, Granddad. It's not a problem. I'm fine." And another bruise and another cut. The thing about Maddie is she can't stop experimenting. She's not quite yet at the riding a bike without the wheels, but she doesn't want the wheels on the bike because she sees her brothers who are older than her riding their bikes. And so she is straight onto a bike without wheels and says, "Look, Granddad, watch me." And of course she's back on the ground, fallen over with a cut here or something there. But she can't help it. Because you see, from birth to some strange point called adulthood, we as human beings were designed to experiment. And the way we grow and the way we move from childhood into adulthood is primarily by experimenting. That's how we learn. And the thing about experimenting is that you fail. That's what experiments are. Most experiments fail. But the thing about it is, as you try something and it doesn't work, you figure that one out and you can try something else. In other words, we learn to do the things that we are doing well by learning from what didn't work to try again, and try again, try again. The way you change is through that kind of experimenting. And so what we're doing in the 5-step process is inviting you into experiments in simple practices of change built around Luke 10, 1 through 12. Going out, entering into neighborhoods and communities, sitting at the tables of the other, asking, what's God up to here? And how might we design experiments to join with what God is up to? That's where we're going. Now, an observation, and let me test this. Very often, most of us, when we reach adulthood, actually stop experimenting. Because we somehow enter in adulthood a world in which failing is not rewarded and not permitted. So experiments start to disappear. And we become more like people who get calcified in predictable, manageable habits that we don't know how to change. Like someone who, sits down all day And because they sit down all day, when they stand up, the bones go creak. And the creaking is not really because you reach my ancient age. It's because you don't test them, work them, experiment them. But more than that, churches actually become places where experimenting is not welcome. And for all kinds of reasons, where churches become places where if you fit into what's going on, you're okay. But if you say, well, why don't we do it a different way? Not so. But churches become places where failure is either not talked about or not permitted. Now, I don't know what you Lutherans are like, because your theology should make you more robust than this. But Baptists are the worst, and I can talk about that because I used to be a Baptist. But you know, Baptists sing songs like, every day with Jesus is better than the day before, right? Now, I used to hear Baptists sing those songs, and the Anglican in me would emerge, and under my breath I would go, well, that's bullshit. Or Baptists would preach that anyone who is in Christ is a new creation. All the old stuff's passed away, everything's become new. Have you heard that Bible verse before? It's 2 Corinthians 5:13. And so that if anybody's in Christ, they're a new creation. Well, A, it's a misinterpretation, but B, you know what that does? It shuts down risk, and it closes out failure. Because you see, if every day with Jesus is better than the day before, and if in Christ I am now a new creation, then I don't make mistakes anymore. So you see, one of the big things we've got to learn to do in our churches is how to experiment again, how to take risks, some of which are not going to work. But out of that risking, like my granddaughter, you learn to thrive. So we know that change takes place the more we learn some simple steps for taking risks and experiments. One final thing, and I'll turn it back to Fiona. Here's another thing we've learned about change. You need to write this one down and underline it. To the extent that clergy lead change process in congregations, there will be no change. Let me say it again. To the extent that clergy lead change process in a congregation, there will be no change. Now let me explain that to you. And let me explain it in an illustration I use all the time. I don't have one here. But on a Sunday morning, I get the New York Times, the Sunday New York Times, delivered to my door. And that New York Times is always wrapped in elastic bands. And I've got to be careful when I am unraveling those elastic bands from that newspaper, because you know what happens to elastic bands when they lose their tension, don't you? Right? They hit you. So here's how I want you to think about clergy leading change. Think of elastic bands. And if you take an elastic band and you put your two fingers in it and you stretch it, so long as you have those two fingers in the elastic band, it stays stretched, right? There's tension, there's creativity, something's going on. But what happens when you take your fingers out? It goes back to the way it was before. Over and over and over and over again, I have done myself and I have observed keen clergy coming into a church with all kinds of bright, energetic ideas. And I have watched congregations go, isn't this wonderful? These are God's leaders for our time. Let's join with them. I call them Pied Pipers. And they come up with all kinds of programs, and some people join those programs, and then, it's happened to me, I've watched it with many others, those clergy, this is God's fault, it's not their fault, are called somewhere else. And 6 months to 12 months after they've left, the church goes back to the way it was before. Ever experienced that? No? Never had that experience before? I see it all the time. So you see, change process that's dependent upon clergy leading it creates energy for a while. But over a midterm, it does not change the culture. So what we want to do is invite you, as God's people, into some simple steps and practices and experiments in change. Final thing is that the change process in the 5 steps that we introduce you into is about 2 things. You keep doing well all of the developmental church pieces that you're doing. In fact, if you don't think you're doing those well enough, then let's talk about it and get help for you to become even better at those attractional developmental things. So that's good. But we want to build upon that and give you the tools and the skills for becoming really effective transitional churches. That is, asking what are the experiments that we can create in engaging our communities where people are not from Denmark anymore, engaging our communities and being with those people and listening. Because in the listening, we will see what God is already up to. And we can join with what God is up to. And that's where new life starts to happen for our churches. So these are the things we're learning. The other thing we're learning that Fiona will talk about this morning is we bring churches together to learn from one another. You are the best teachers of each other. You are the best resources for one another. Our job is to bring you together so that you learn from each other. But Fiona.
Okay. So a few things that I want to talk about, and then we'll move into a time where you can ask questions. So we'll have a question and answer time. So first of all, just to build on what Alan was saying, I want to talk a little bit about the congregational learning communities, and that's the title that we have on the top of the description of the 5-step process, the congregational learning communities. So basically, how the process works is each congregation forms a guiding team, okay? The kinds of people that you want to have on your guiding team, first of all, are ones that are not already up to here with responsibilities in the church. They're not super stretched already with whether it's council duties or committee duties or whatever that looks like. Because that work in the life of your church is really, really important work. So we want to make sure that the people who are doing those things still have their full attention and capacity to continue to do that really important work that's already going on in the life of your church. Okay? So people on your guiding teams would be people who are not quite as plugged in with what's happening in the running and the life of your church now, because it's important that that work continue. People on your guiding teams, if I was to talk about personality kinds of attributes, you want people who are curious, who are interested in learning, who would be willing to try things, who are good relationship people, who are good at organizing things. So you're going to have a team at each of your churches. Now the number of people on your team is going to depend roughly on how big your church is. We had somebody in yesterday who said, I have a congregation of 25 members. How many people do I have to have on my guiding team? Do I have to have 5? Because 5 is a whole lot of people in our church. And we're like, no, you don't need to have 5, but you wouldn't probably want to go less than 3. So the number of people that you have on your guiding team is going to be somewhat dependent on the size of your church. But this team is going to get together probably once a month. And they're going to commit themselves to this 18-month journey. So it's not an insignificant time commitment to say yes to the guiding team. So the guiding teams are going to meet as a group within the congregation probably once a month throughout the process. There's various tasks that come along. And then the other thing that the guiding teams are going to do is come together with other guiding teams. And this is where the congregational learning communities come in. So at the beginning of each step in the process, we get the guiding teams together from the different congregations. And there's two purposes for that. One is to train them in what the next step looks like, to give them experience of what kind of processes they're going to be doing within the next step, and also to give them a chance to reflect with each other and the other teams that are involved in this process what they've been learning, what have their experiences been, what are their stories that they want to share with each other, because as Alan said, so much of the learning is what happens across teams. So that's a little bit about how the guiding teams work. The role of the synod in this process. Now your synod has spent lots of time considering this and want to find a way to support the teams. And so the synod's role is to walk alongside what the congregational teams are doing, to be learning. What are the challenges that congregations are facing? What are the wins that congregations are experiencing as they go through this process? And how can the synod in its role support the work of the congregations? So that's sort of overall what the role of the synod is going to be. And then the role of the missional network. We are going to be walking along beside you as well, providing you with the training that you need, providing you with coaching to your teams as you work through this, supporting you, answering your questions, doing our best to equip you as you experience this journey. So having said all of that, and also given that we only talked sort of high level about the 5-step process itself before lunch, what questions do you have? Yes.
Can you give any examples of experiments that other congregations have done, like under step 3, experiment teams at work in the community? I'm curious if there's any examples that you might be able to share with us.
I talked about a little bit earlier the community garden. That was an experiment that one church tried. Other churches have actually taken things that they're already doing and just tweaked them slightly. So they may have a meal program in their church where they have like a soup kitchen where people are coming in and their service to the community is to provide the meals for the people. And how they've tweaked it is instead of actually just providing the meal and whatever, that they've looked at ways of actually sitting down with the people who are coming for the meal and engaging with them. So it's changing the nature of the work from, I'm just doing this for you, to I want to be with you. So, I mean, the experiments come out of your own particular context because the experiments are in response to what you are hearing where you are.
One illustration that was mentioned, I think this morning, was one church was across the road from the school and began to say, we need to be more than just across the road from the school. We need to actually engage with the school. And so they did what I think some of you was described here. They began to pack boxes or participate in the lunch program, and which is great stuff. We talk about that as helping and meeting needs. And so in the midst of doing that, the experiment that they began to create, some of them was, how do we move from giving and resourcing and meeting needs to developing a relationship with the parents of some of these kids who are in the school program in order to sit with them and listen and discover who they are. And that experiment began to result in a new kind of relationship with people who would never have thought of coming to the church. But the God stuff began to come onto them. So that's an example of experiment.
a question. Could you clarify the role of the pastor?
Came online.
Came online, okay. So, first of all, I should say a little bit about what your pastors are doing. The pastors are going through a parallel process. So the congregations are on this 5-step journey. The clergy, the pastors, have their own 5-step journey that they're doing. And what they're doing is they're looking at their own leadership capacities and skills to figure out where are their growing edges that they can work on to support the work that the congregation teams are doing. So the pastors are actually very busy having their own experience and going on their own journey. So essentially, the way that it works in the congregation side is this is an initiative of the people. So your guiding team is the group that's going to take your congregation through this process. The role of the pastor in that is to be a cheerleader, is to be paying attention to what you're doing, but not being the one who is responsible for doing the doing. So they know what you're doing, they're supporting you in what you're doing, they have their own work that they're doing, and they are there to listen to what you're learning as you go through this process. Does that answer that question?
I'll see.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
Can you give us some information on this program itself? Like how long has it been around? Where is it developed?
The program itself, so the question is how long has the program been around and where has it been developed?
Right. And in fact, where it's in operation now?
Oh, okay.
Generally.
Sure, go ahead, yeah.
Well, where it was developed, I guess I was the primary person who developed it a number of years ago. Because of many of the reasons I've described to you, I began to learn and to realize that doing this kind of change is not intuitive to most of us, and that unless you had good process, then people don't learn how to do this change. So I began to design that with others. So the program itself comes out of our shop, our imagination. Where is it at work? It is at work for the last 2.5 years. The Anglican Diocese of Toronto has been very much involved and invested. They have gone through now 2 iterations of this process, and they're building it into their very life. They have we have trained about 3 people, who, much like Juliana, who are paid staff, who are building this into all of the life of the 300-odd congregations that are there. We've trained multiple coaches inside the system so that what this is about is putting inside the system the skills to. So Toronto Diocese, we're doing it with your kissing cousins across the mountains there, the ELCIC-BC. Did I get that right? Good. We're doing it with Presbyterians on both the East Coast and the West Coast. We're doing it with American Baptists. We're doing it with, that doesn't sound right, does it? But you've had all the sex fights, so you don't understand what I'm talking about. We're doing it in Australia. We're doing it with Presbyterians in New Zealand. And if I stand up here longer, I'll find out more. So it's a well-established, well-tried process that we, however, are constantly changing and updating and redesigning out of all the things that we learn from folks like you. Does that answer your question?
Sure does. That's
Yep.
great. Thanks.
Other questions? Yes.
I have a question regarding the guiding team.
Okay.
I can see where this really works well when people are very committed and have the time to commit.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people on church council or whatever don't have that time. But I also think that it is fundamental work of a church. And I wonder why, I guess, you know, how fast are you in the guidelines as far as who composes the guiding team? Because I think of our church and I think, you know what, there's a lot of strong leadership, but that strong leadership is on church council.
Right.
And I would hate to see, hate to see them not engaged
Right.
in the guiding team, because I think they've got a lot of talent and energy and wherewithal. So, I mean, are we steadfast, nobody on church council
Okay.
should be on the guiding team?
So a question about the guiding team and the makeup of the guiding team. Two things I would say.
And the role of council.
And the role of council, that, I'll get
Yeah.
into that, yeah. So, two things I would say about that. One is, as throughout the process, there's a regular touching base with council. So at various points along the way, we have identified that it's important for the guiding teams to be with council. To say, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what we're learning. Further along the road, this is what we're doing, this is what we're learning. So council is not like left in the dark in this by any stretch, not at all. In fact, it's important, that communication piece is important for the work of the guiding team. You don't want the guiding team to be curled away in a little ball in the corner doing their thing in isolation from what's going on in the life of your church and in isolation from the work that your council's doing. So there is regular points along the way where the guiding team is engaging with council. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say is I understand the comment about strong leadership in council and you know, really wanting to make sure that those skills are used in the best way. It is important that the people on the council can focus on what the important work that they are doing. So we would say, like, if you wanted to have some representation of council, like maybe one person or a couple of people on your guiding team, that would be okay. It's not like a hard and fast, you cannot cross that line. And it's going to be somewhat dependent on the people themselves, the context of your congregation, what other resources that you've got available to you, obviously. But just to keep in mind that this is not, this is a fairly, it's a commitment to get involved in this process. And we don't want it to take away from the really good work that the people that are on your council are engaging their time with. Okay? Yes?
So would you say that this job of listening to each other and listening to the neighborhood, that's the role of the guiding team? They're doing that listening?
The role of the guiding team in phase one is yes. Okay. Yes, they are. And they're also encouraging the people in the congregation to start to do that too. So for an example, at the beginning of step one of the tools that we provide the guiding teams with is a little worksheet on how to listen to your neighborhood. And it goes through, you know, go out at different times of the day, what's different at different times of the day. What are you hearing? What's different about your neighborhood compared to a few years ago? Who's there? Who's not there? Where did they go? Who's visible? Who's not visible? Whose voices are missing in this mix? Pretty straightforward worksheet that people can take out and work through as they walk through their neighborhood. And pretty early on in the process, we encourage the guiding teams to say to members of the congregation, hey, go and do this and tell us what you're learning. So yes, they're the drivers behind doing that listening, and yes, they're doing that listening themselves, but we also want them to start to encourage participation more broadly than just the small guiding team fairly early on.
Just to make a couple of comments
Yep.
about
Mhm.
that. Part of what we've learned is that obviously the guiding team's role, as Fiona said, is to invite the congregation to participate in this. But what we've learned is that in the congregation, for example, when the guiding team starts to do these listening interviews with people in the congregation, there are some people who are going to say, this is great, thank you. We're having a wonderful time in these conversations. There are others who are going to go, oh, come on, not this again. Why are we doing this? We did this 150 years ago, and it didn't change anything then. And so, but here's what happens. As people begin to enter these listening conversations, word gets out, right? We call it parking lot communication. Word gets out amongst people, and those who went, well, I don't want to do this, begin to say, how come I haven't been included in this? And so you're gradually inviting people in to participate. But we recognize that it's an invitation to everybody, but it begins small, and as more people in the congregation go, well, that's not scary, I can try that. That's what starts to build. Similarly, in terms of the experiments, walking around the neighborhood, asking, where might we join God? In terms of those experiments, and you heard me give an example that this is not climbing Mount Everest. This is just, what happens is a lot of people go, I could never do that. I think you'd mentioned that this morning. I could never do that. But what happens is that when a few people begin these experiments, in the way I described, and we could keep you all day with experiments, others begin to go, oh, that's not as scary, as complicated as I thought. If Mary Smith could do that there, here's what I could do in my neighborhood. And the experiments start to grow. So the guiding team is seeding and inviting and helping to repeat as more and more people get engaged.
Something just came to mind hearing those comments. It's getting to the time of year for annual meetings for lots of congregations, and a big job for nominating committees to find people that will sit on council. And in a small congregation, one of the first things we hear is, well, I sat on council for 10 years, 25 years ago, so I've done my job and I don't need to do that anymore. The other comment we hear is, I've only been coming for 2 years and I don't really know what that's about, so I don't feel comfortable doing that. I would suggest that's a great blend.
Yeah.
To have on a guiding team, have somebody who is very involved 15 years ago and say, okay, now you have a chance to make things different. They may say, well, yeah, but I don't have any ideas. But we have young people that are coming that are coming from the Roman Catholic background, from either through marriage or just deciding they want something different and aren't comfortable with the Lutheran heritage, so they're saying, well, I can't do that on council because I don't know what Lutheran is all about.
Right.
But this is kind of ecumenical. I mean, it's across all of them, so they can bring ideas in that would say, I'm new, but I have some ideas on how I think things can change.
Yeah, that would be great. The combination of people who are new and people who have served in the past who feel they've made their commitment, but they have
You
skills
don't have
that
to
can
serve on
add,
council.
and they
but
don't have
we
to be
have
on
a deal
council.
for you.
Yeah, they can come and try something new. Yeah. And I mean, I think the thing about that is, this is not about coming in with the solutions.
Yeah.
Very much so. It's not about coming in with the solutions. It's not about saying, I know what we can do. It's about engaging in a process where you're going to learn what might be possible. So it's that openness. It's back to the curiosity. It's about saying, I wonder, and be willing to experience that.
Whether, just briefly start, we've got workbooks for every stage of this.
Yeah.
It's not flying blind.
No, not at all. So when you come, at each of the beginning of each of the steps, we give you a workbook, a little booklet that talks about the work that's coming up in that step, gives you the tools. So it's a resource that you take away every time we come together. So you're not sort of left to go out on your own and experience listening. We do give you some concrete tools that you can use to help to guide you through the process.
And the coaches.
And the coach works alongside you at the various stages of the process as well. Yeah.
So how often would the groups get together and where?
Okay. If you look at your application form, there are dates listed on the form of when the guiding teams are going to meet together as a congregational learning community. So it's right at the bottom here of your form, those dates are all set up. So those are the times when the congregational guiding teams will come together.
Here.
And it's most likely going to be here in Red Deer, somewhere central.
And they're tentative dates because?
Yes, and they are tentative dates because they go quite far out, but those are the dates that we're working on because they make sense given the flow of the work that you'll be doing. Other questions?
I just thought about this. The advantage that you've got is that you now have these kissing cousins on the other side of the mountain who've already had 5 or 6 guiding teams who could easily become resources for you to talk with about how to do this.
Yeah, the teams just to give you some context, the teams that are working on this in the BC Lutheran Church are starting into their experiments. That's where they're at. So they've gone through step 1, they've gone through step 2, and they're at the beginning of step 3. So they're a bit ahead of you.
Where are those congregations?
Pardon me?
Where are they?
In BC, they're sort of spread. There's some in the Lower Mainland, some in the Vancouver area. There's one on Vancouver Island. There's one in Salmon Arm, so they're a bit spread out in BC, and they are also in the process in January of just starting with their second iteration. So some more congregations that are starting at step 1 in January. Yeah.
So if there's a meeting here or wherever on the 15th of February, could you kind of go over the types of things that would be involved with gearing up for that meeting amongst the congregation?
So in advance of that meeting?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So in advance of that meeting, first of all, you need to decide you're in. Julianne's given you the forms to do that, and there's a January 1st.
Yeah, if we need to change it to January 1st. So
Yeah.
they, on the top of the second page, they can cross out December 15th and put
Okay.
December.
So the top of the second page, it says you have to sign up by December 15th. In talking with the pastors yesterday, we realized that with timing of council meetings and all kinds of other stuff going on in the life of the congregations, that date didn't work. And so January 1st was the date that Julianne needs to know if you're in or not. So that's the first thing that you would attend to before that point. The second thing is to figure out who your guiding team is going to be. And the date in February is when we do the first training at the beginning of step 1.
You really don't even have, not necessarily even have any meetings before that or any type of...
No.
Okay.
So what's your first meeting, the whole guiding team from your congregation should be?
Here.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
As far as rostered leaders, how much time commitment from them is going to be involved? In our case, we have a retired gentleman who's serving supposedly recorder, but is doing about 1.75 time. And I just don't know whether we want to ask him to take on a whole lot more.
Okay, so the question is, what's the role of your rostered leader in your congregation process? Very little, because this is your work.
But how much does he have to do on his own to be part of this? The pastors, what's the pastor commitment? Because
Oh, I
congregations
see.
require a pastor?
Right, right. The pastor stream is, they get together mainly over the telephone or online. There's not nearly as much face-to-face. Well, no, that's not true. It's
No,
just
some of
different.
them will meet once a month.
They will meet once a month, yeah. The pastors will meet once a month. And then they'll have some work to do in between as well. So what would you say about the pastor time?
You're asking me, I'd have to check with Larry and Juliana whether your pastor, was he here? Yes. So let me give you a general answer. Rostered leaders who join this process would be meeting once a month through a pretty clearly defined set of steps in which they're looking at 2 primary things. One, some skills and capacities that they need to develop alongside the ones they have to really serve you and give a different kind of leadership in the process we're describing. And they are going to look at a key challenge, which for them as a leader, they want to develop skills in the church. So they are meeting together once a month. But we've designed this in such a way that the work that these clergy are doing, or these rostered leaders are doing, is directly connected to their regular ongoing pastoral work. So this is not something out there in the ozone. It is something, the work that they're doing is deeply embedded in who they are as leaders, as pastors, as clergy in your congregation. And our experience is that this work actually not just augments, but intensifies their ability to be good leaders in your congregation.
Excuse me, where would these pastors meet then?
That's all under conversation right now. There are anywhere from 12 to 18 who are thinking about joining. They are going to be in geographical areas. So some, we will cluster them together in groups of a certain size, and some will meet face to face because geography allows that. Others will meet online together, and just like Fiona's describing with you, they will have a coach and they will have a workbook to work with. So does that answer your question?
Partially, also I'd like to find out too from you as to if they're going to be traveling somewhere, where do they put in their travel costs, or is that part of their own pocket?
What we've told them to do is work out the travel cost, multiply by 3, and give it back to the church. I don't know.
No, it comes from the congregation,
It comes to the congregation.
just as part of their,
So what we understand is that you cannot participate without your pastor being part of this.
Clergy can participate whether or not a congregation participates, but a congregation must have its rostered leader participating. The reason for that, I think, it's fairly obvious.
Yeah,
That
it is, but
yeah.
going back, I mean, our pastor is 75 years old on Tuesday. He's serving in a 3/4 capacity, supposedly, but he's doing more than that. And I'm excited about this program. I think it's awesome. I'm not sure we can ask him to take that additional work.
Here's what I would recommend. That you make sure that you and or this pastor have a conversation with Juliana or with Larry and work it out at that level. Because I suspect that these two folk have some pretty good ideas about what's going on and how to help with that.
Is there any possibility that interested parties could piggyback onto another small congregation close by, just in the training process?
Really worth doing.
Yeah?
Yeah, really worth doing.
It might be helpful to know too that the plan is that we will contract with the Mission Network for 18 months, so that this process begins in February, goes 18 months, and then the fall of 2015 there would be another cohort that would start. So there may be some pastors, some congregations that really aren't ready for February for various reasons. There will be another entry point, and we're hoping that this will just continue on as we develop leaders, coaches within the synod as well. So that's something just to think about.
Because we partner with the Anglican Church in Randy, could we
Right.
bring them in?
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's another-
I just had another thought about the travel costs. Sorry, I'll get up here. I just had a thought about the travel costs. Part of the clergy conversation or the roster conversation yesterday was funding for, they're going to do an assessment and there's a $300 cost of that. Bishop Larry has talked to the continuing education department of the ELCIC, and it's been approved as an acceptable use of continuing ed. So travel might fall under that for continuing ed, or no? Oh, okay, in that case, forget I said that, it has to come from the congregation.
But it was a nice try.
It was a nice try. Or the congregation could pay for the pastor's participation, that's another option then.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to be creative. Travel, for example, Mennonites always have Mennonite hotels, which means whenever you travel, you always know where the Mennonites live, and they always put you up. Maybe you can have some Lutheran hotels to cover. So there's lots of creative ways of doing this, so that it doesn't have to be overwhelming financially.
Any other questions? Yes.
Could I say just a little bit more about this white sheet?
Absolutely.
I wanted to just express to you that this white sheet was created.
Julianne,
Oh, come stand on the X.
so that they can see you.
They know me, they can hear me.
I know.
The white sheet that is the handout about congregational information. The first page is just for information, so that you have all the dates and all the numbers and you can pull that off. The other part is the application/covenant. And I think covenant is a more important part. This is the question of, has God led your congregation? Are you getting the nudge? Does it seem right? That part will be sent in, and then as Alan has already said, we have to sort of group and figure, and the pastors will not necessarily be in the same groupings either. So, because they're in a parallel process. So, it's just, I wanted to also say that form is online, for those of you who are really keen. There's a new tab, about a month old, maybe 2 now, on the Alberta website, the Synod website, and it's called Missional Formation, and under that was the letter some of you saw, the poster for this event, and one's called Rostered Covenant, and one's called Congregational Covenant. So the one you have in your hand is available online under Congregational Covenant. And January 1st is the deadline. Just
So if you have further questions after the show is over here, we can contact you.
you do, and my number should be on the bottom. Is it?
You're the one that's chief.
I believe it's on the white sheet, not the yellow sheet.
And the video will be available online.
Hopefully the technology is working, and this should be available online as soon as we can get it onto the website, like on our Alberta Synod website. It just may take a little bit to connect it up.
So the pastor's one is not available online?
Yes, it's there too. Yeah, they're both there.
Yes.
So, this question maybe for Julianne, but,
Okay.
Yes.
so on that first page, it talks about average worship attendance,
Oh, yes.
and then the monthly financial commitment for 18 months.
Right. Each month for 18 months.
Each month for 18 months. So what is that, if I'm putting our congregation in that $125 a month commitment,
Okay.
what is that covering and what other costs do we have to be aware of?
Fair enough. That's covering the cost of the missional network, or a portion of it, actually. And the rest of the cost for you that your congregation needs to think about is getting together, the traveling part of that for you. So there's 5 times or 6 times to come here to Red Deer. And I suppose one could argue the cost of your experiments, but they're not supposed to be costly. Nah. So part of it is just investing in the process, and part of it is to be contributing to the cost of the, thank you. Expert was in my head and I knew I didn't want to say that.
Coaches.
Don't say that way, coaches. I also wanted to say, for those of you who like details, when this starts, it's a simple thing of adding your cost of this, participating in this, with your monthly benevolence that you send into the Synod. You can just put it all together, just send it to the Synod office all at one fell swoop, make that easier. So
Do you
just
want
on.
separate checks or no?
Do you want separate checks? No.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, but Dean, it's important to have it marked what's benevolence and what's for this, just like in the notation part. Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah.
Fiona, I would just like to say that I listened to Alan here on his previous presentation
Yeah.
a few months ago.
And she's much better.
And I'm also on Synod Council for the conference and listened to Larry at our council retreat. Larry's passionate about this. Then I had the opportunity, because our pastor was away and they wanted to know whether to have a fill-in pulpit supply that day. And I said, you know, it's fresh enough in my mind. Actually, I made this commitment on my drive home from Cochrane, or from Calgary, when we attended Julianne's service. I said, I think I could do a message on that. And I am not a theologian by any stretch, so I'm very hesitant to say that I do sermons, but I did do a message, and I had probably 80% of our congregation nodding their head towards this concept. And Larry does a great job of talking about Missio Dei, and you could see people were relating. Yeah, and so anyone who's delivered a lay message and gets people to nod in the congregation and not going to sleep, I can see they're grasping, getting the point.
It's great.
That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great.
So you're volunteering to go around to other churches?
So when are you going to give us the answers to these questions?
These ones?
Yep.
You get to learn those as you go.
That's not the right answer.
Yes, it is.
Which question do you want to respond?
Just kidding.
Anything else? Any other questions that anybody's got? No? That's great. Well, if you do have questions after you've had some time to think about it and talk to some of the folks in your congregations, send them to Julianne. And if she's not able to answer them directly like that, she'll send them on to me or to Alan, and we will get you a response. Okay.
Before we do a closing, could I get everybody to stand up, look like you like each other, and wave, and take a picture, and I'll send it to you so you can use
Wonderful.
it. Yeah.
We'd like to get one of you and Fiona and 2 Alan, so.
Yeah.
Are we waiting? Oh.
Okay, okay, pretend, don't take it seriously, pretend you're charismatics and sort of wave at me and say, hi, there you go, my gosh. How did that feel? Awful, sit down.
So stand up again so we can take another picture with Alan and Fiona, which will go on the website.
Just so it stands so they can see you there.
Please.
Do you need to be right here?
Yeah, just look like regular people. Yeah. Nobody cares about it. You got it. Sharon, just a little bit to the right. Don't forget to blink. Well, that is beautiful.
Okay, I'm not even there yet, so. We're just gonna have to take what we get here. Would you like to be part of this picture too?
Oh, you go ahead.
Oh,
This way. Okay.
wow. Thank you.
A new skill.
I'll
send it to you, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope that works.
Could you take your red hymnal, have a seat?
Thanks for sprinting. Gotta sign off and drive to
In a moment, we're going to sing hymn 849. So you can find that in your Cranberry hymn book, 849. One of the gifts of being a bishop is that you travel around a lot and you're always in a different community of faith every Sunday. And a while ago, I heard this hymn, 849, and it was one that I wasn't familiar with. And it's become one of my favorite ones. I think partly because it's originally Spanish text, and my heart, a large part of my heart is in Colombia, in South America, and Diane can identify with that, and so I think that's quite meaningful. One of the reasons why it's meaningful. We're going to sing that in a minute. Thank you for this day. I think we're about a journey together. I don't see what we've talked about today as a program, but rather a process for us, and it's a journey. And as we journey, we learn, we experiment, we risk, we screw up, we work at it again. And as you're considering participating in this way, and today you've really just seen the overarching pattern, I suppose, of this process. And there's certainly more detail than that. But I invite you to prayerfully discern your congregation's participation in this process. And that you'll be prayerfully praying for your pastor as well. I think there's some very important pieces for our rostered leaders as well as they work through this process as it's been developed as well. Wanted to thank Sharon particularly for your help today, getting lunch ready and et cetera, and there's lots more coffee, so if you have your coffee mug, take some with you, and there's baking to take for the journey as well. So thank you very much, Sharon. And to Julie, yes. And to Julianne for working to put this together. It was about, was it 2 years ago, Sharon, that we flew to BC, and we heard Alan speak to the rostered leaders there. And we had heard about the Missional Network prior to that, but that was really our first connection with Alan. And so for us, it's really, at the Synod office, it's been a journey of coming to this day, and then to February as well. Mark alluded to a meeting earlier this year. Alan was with our Synod Council here at Good Shepherd as well for a day, and sharing about the process, sharing of himself as well. And then after that, probably about a month later or so, 6 weeks, we formed a small group from Synod Council, and a few others were invited to hear Alan and to begin to talk about how could this be engaged within our Synod and what might this look like. So it's been a process and a journey for us as well. We're thankful that Synod Council has been supportive of moving in this direction as a Synod, and supporting them in terms of finances as well. So what you're paying is just a very small part of the actual costs. But we have a bequest in our Synod, which we call the RATS Fund, and Synod Council applied for some funds from that, which helps to undergird this as well. So I'm thankful, Mark, to you and to Synod Council members for capturing this vision and this possibility within our Synod as well. Alan is also going to be one of our main speakers or presenters at Synod Convention in June, which will be in Camrose. So others will have an opportunity to hear from Alan at that time as well. So we're happy that you can join us for that event too, Alan. I think that's all I needed to say. Yeah, I think so. Let's stand and sing hymn 849. If it's unfamiliar to you, just sing as you become familiar with it. No, pardon me. Have a seat. We're not going to sing, sorry. What I'd like you to do is group together in two congregations. So find, if there's a couple from one congregation, find another congregation. And what I'd like to invite you to do is pray for each other as you begin this process of discernment. So there might be a specific prayer request that you have for your congregation. Share that and then pray for each other. Would you do that? And then we'll sing the hymn. We'll actually get to the hymn. Okay. So find two congregations together, share perhaps a need, and pray for each other this time. And then we'll sing.